I'm Nora Bennett, 29 years old, and the night my parents raised crystal flutes over my grandfather's marble floor. The house felt colder than the winter air outside. Laughter carried, but none of it sounded like home. My mother's bracelet chimed as she poured more champagne, my father's voice riding high as he said, "We were finally where we belong," and all I could see was the empty leather chair by the library fire where Walter Pierce usually read the paper. I kept pushing seafood around a gold-rimmed plate while the chandelier threw diamonds across silver, trying to remember the last time this room smelled like lemon oil and coffee instead of victory. When my phone buzzed, I meant to ignore it, but a number repeated down the screen 29 missed calls from my grandfather, a man who never called twice. My throat tightened. I slipped away from the noise and stepped onto the terrace, the pool lights trembling like they were cold too. In the glass door's reflection, I watched my parents toast again, and I knew I was watching something I couldn't unsee. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, then hit like and subscribe if you've ever had to stand up for what's right, even when it put you at odds with family. I grew up in a small ranch house 2 towns over where weekend treats meant pot roast and a rented movie, and birthdays were cake from a sheet pan with too much frosting. My mother kept lists on the fridge. My father kept cash in an envelope, and Walter kept his promises. He never bragged about the money that came later. He taught me to wipe down tools after I used them to send thank you notes when someone showed up for you, and to never mistake a closed door for a final answer. When I was little, I learned to count by sorting nails in his garage and to read by sounding out headlines beside his chair, his hand resting on the paper like he was guarding something that mattered. Even after his name landed on a tower in Midtown, he'd wear the same tweed coat and show up to school concerts early, sitting in the back, so the attention stayed on the kids. He used to say that kindness builds longer than concrete, and integrity is what holds it all up when the weather turns. The first time I set foot in the Hudson Valley estate, I was 12. Walter called it the big house because he didn't like the word mansion, and he walked me through each room like a father handing over a toolbox. He told me where my grandmother had sung by the old piano, where the fountain stones caught the morning light, and where the library ladder stuck near the S authors. He said a house remembers how it's treated just like people do. Tonight those rooms rang with something else. The rugs were softer than anything I grew up with, but the voices were sharper. The wine was older, but the mood felt careless and new. Looking at my parents as they admired themselves in the French doors, I realized how far we'd drifted from the kitchen table where we'd once passed bowls without speaking, knowing what the other would want. My mother called across the table, her tone sweet, with an edge asking me to raise a glass to my grandfather's generosity, and my father clapped me on the shoulder like we were all on the same team. I asked where Walter was, and my father said he was resting, like the word could explain the empty chair and the way the staff kept looking at the hall, as if someone should appear. A server cleared plates we barely touched, another set dessert where conversation should have been. In every reflective surface, I saw my own face, and behind it, the chair by the fire. The house had been loved for decades. Tonight it felt borrowed. I found my grandfather in memory before I could find him in person, the way he'd cup my elbow on icy steps, the way he'd pause before signing anything reading twice and then one more time, the way his phone calls were always measured, never urgent. 29 missed calls didn't fit the man I knew. I tried him back, straight to voicemail. The terrace door squeaked as I eased it open again. The night air was crisp and clean, and for a moment the whole place seemed to hold its breath. A storm line sat low over the hills, and I thought about the years he'd built this life one careful choice at a time, and how fast a wrong one could scatter the pieces. I wasn't raised for chandeliers. I was raised for eye contact and steady hands. Walter taught me that wealth without purpose is just heavy furniture, and that the only things worth keeping are the ones you can stand to lose and still recognize yourself. Standing there with my phone glowing in my palm, I felt the weight of both worlds, the careful one that taught me to be useful and decent, and the glittering one that swallowed people whole when they stopped paying attention. My parents' laughter rolled across the pool, buoyant and careless. Inside a folder sat on the coffee table, thick with legal pages, and a pen laid across it like a flag. I remembered Walter reading at the library window, the lamp throwing a small circle of light, and wondered what he thought I should do now. I called again. Voicemail. Then my mother's phone lit up on the table with his name and went dark after 2 rings, and my father said he was probably already on a flight somewhere warm, as if that was something Walter did, without saying goodbye. The room buzzed with plans for decorators and a new car to match the new driveway, and all I heard was a click I couldn't place, like a door catching somewhere down the hall. I stepped back outside and leaned against the cool stone, the scent of wet leaves rising from the lawn. Between my heartbeat and the hush of the fountain, I could almost hear his voice telling me to think. First speak second, and never let fear make your choices for you. When the text came, it didn't have a name attached, just a line that made my stomach drop. Enjoy the house while it's still yours. I stared at the words until they blurred, then read them again, steadying my breath the way Walter taught me before big moments. I didn't know who sent it, but I knew what it felt like, a warning without panic, a line drawn without shouting. I slipped my phone into my pocket and walked back toward the light, the party glow turning everything soft. Somewhere beyond the hills, thunder moved a long, low roll, and the chandeliers quivered as if they'd heard it too. I didn't have answers, not yet, but by morning the first knock at the door would make sure nobody in that house could ignore the question. Morning light slipped through the tall windows like it had been waiting to expose something. The house felt different, still beautiful, still grand, but uneasy. The laughter from the night before had faded into a silence thick enough to hear my own heartbeat. When I came downstairs, my parents were already dressed for the day. My father wore a navy jacket and a forced smile. My mother had pearls at her throat, and that look she saved for important occasions. The breakfast table was set for 3, but only 2 plates were in use. "Where's Grandpa?" I asked, setting down my mug. My mother buttered her toast with practiced calm. "Packing," she said. "We're driving him to the airport." The word didn't sit right. "Airport," I repeated. My father looked up from his coffee, all business. "He needs a break, a little time away. He's been tired lately." The way he said it, too smooth, too certain, made the room feel smaller. When I glanced toward the hall, I caught a glimpse of him sitting in the foyer. His suitcase rested by his feet, his hands folded over his cane. He wore a simple shirt, gray slacks, and the same old leather shoes he always polished himself. I walked over quietly. "You're really leaving?" I asked. He smiled, but his eyes held something else. "Just for a bit, my dear. Your parents think a vacation will do me good." I hesitated. "But you hate traveling." He chuckled softly. "Sometimes it's easier to let people believe they're in charge until they're not." Before I could say anything, my father's voice echoed from the doorway. "Let's get moving, Dad. Don't want to miss your flight." The ride to the airport was long and mostly silent. My father hummed to the radio like it was any other day. My mother scrolled through her phone talking about painters and decorators for the new place. I sat beside my grandfather watching the passing fields blur into gray streaks. His fingers tapped his cane in a slow rhythm, 3 soft beats, then a pause. It was something he did when he was deep in thought. "Are you all right?" I asked quietly. He nodded once. "Do you remember what I told you when your grandmother passed?" he said. I frowned, trying to recall. "That family isn't just blood. It's the people who choose to stand beside you." He smiled faintly. "Exactly." My mother turned around, sharp as glass. "What are you two whispering about memories worth keeping?" he said smoothly, his voice steady. She turned back around without another word. At the terminal, my father pulled up to the curb and popped the trunk. The suitcase hit the sidewalk with a dull thud. "Here we are," he said. "All set." Grandpa looked around a little confused. "Do I have a ticket?" My mother adjusted her sunglasses. "It's digital. You'll find it when you check in." "And where am I headed exactly?" he asked. My father shrugged, already halfway back to the driver's seat. "You'll figure it out. You always do." It was supposed to sound like a joke, but there was nothing kind about it. My mother's voice cut in behind me. "Say goodbye, Nora." I stepped closer. "You'll call when you land." He smiled, gentle as always. "Of course. I always call." Then he lifted his suitcase handle and turned toward the entrance. My parents didn't wait for him to walk inside. By the time he reached the automatic doors, we were already pulling away. I turned in my seat to look back. Through the rear window, I saw him standing beneath the awning, small against the glass wall, coat fluttering in the wind. My mother gripped the wheel. "Don't look back," she said flatly. "He'll be fine." But I did. And I saw him sit on a bench by the gate, pull out his phone and stare at it before dialing. The image stayed with me all the way back, his steady patience against the rush of travelers moving past him. We stopped for lunch downtown. My parents were in high spirits, laughing about paint colors and staff arrangements like the morning had never happened. I barely touched my food. Then my phone buzzed. 29 missed calls, all from him. My hands went cold. "Did he call you?" I asked. My mother waved me off, unimpressed. "He's probably on a flight to Europe by now. He'll settle down once he lands." My father chuckled. "Or he's halfway to the Bahamas." The man's unpredictable. Before I could answer, her phone lit up on the table. "Walter Pierce," the screen said. My mother's smile faltered. It rang twice, 3 times. Then she hit silence. Another call came. Then another. 10 in a row. The air around us tightened. My father frowned. "That's odd." "He's just confused again," she said, quickly muting the phone. But then my own phone buzzed again. Another call. Another. The same name. I stood and walked outside before they could stop me. The afternoon heat pressed against my skin, but I was cold underneath. I hit call back. No answer. Straight to voicemail. I tried again, whispering, "Come on, Grandpa, pick up." Nothing. My mind replayed that look on his face, the calm acceptance of someone who knew more than he was saying. Back at the house, the sound of rain began tapping against the windows. My parents opened another bottle of wine and turned on soft music. The deed folder lay open on the coffee table between them, the thick legal pages spread like trophies. "To new beginnings," my father said, raising his glass. "To finally being free of all his lectures," my mother added. The laughter that followed sounded wrong in that room. "Are you sure he called you?" I asked quietly. My mother sighed. "He'll be fine, Nora. You know how dramatic he can be." 29 times, I said. "Does that sound like him?" My father leaned back. "He knows you'll answer. You always do." My mother's jaw tightened. "He's just trying to get attention. Ignore it." But I couldn't. I walked to the library, the one place that still smelled faintly of his cologne, and sank into his chair. The house creaked in the storm, the chandelier swaying slightly overhead. I pulled out my phone and opened the family group chat. The last message was from him, sent just an hour after they left him at the airport. It read, "I hope you take care of my house the way I took care of you." Attached was a photo of a document. Edges crumpled his gold pen, reflected in the corner. My father appeared behind me, reading over my shoulder. "That's just a photo," he said too quickly. "He's bluffing." My mother poured another drink. "He's probably angry we didn't throw a farewell party. Let him cool off." But I knew my grandfather better than that. He wasn't a man who bluffed. He was a man who planned. I stared at that message again, the words looping in my head like a quiet warning. "Take care of my house the way I took care of you." I didn't know what it meant, but my father's hands were trembling slightly when he poured another drink. Outside, thunder rolled over the valley. The chandelier flickered once, and for a second I thought I heard his voice, low and steady, echo in the distance. "Nothing taken by greed lasts long." I tried calling him again, but this time the number was disconnected. My mother's laughter cut short when her phone buzzed again, this time from an unknown number. One short message lit up the screen. "Enjoy the house while it's still yours." She froze the glass, slipping slightly from her hand. My father frowned, setting his drink aside. "Who sent that?" She didn't answer. For the first time that night, both of them looked uneasy. My mother tried to laugh it off, but the sound fell flat. I could feel it, the shift in the air, the start of something neither of them could control. Whatever had happened at that airport wasn't over. It was only beginning. When I went to bed that night, the storm had settled into a quiet drizzle. The lights in the hall flickered, casting long shadows over the staircase. I lay awake, listening to the rain against the glass, and thought about his last words to me that morning. Sometimes you let people think they're in control until they're not. I didn't understand them then, but as thunder rumbled once more over the hills, I realized I was about to. The rain didn't stop through the night. It drummed against the wide glass panels, a steady rhythm that filled every empty space in the house. The sound used to be comforting when I stayed here as a child, wrapped in one of Grandpa's old flannel blankets, listening to him hum quietly as he read beside the fire. But that night, it just reminded me how hollow everything felt. Every shadow seemed to lean closer, every light a little too dim. When I came downstairs the next morning, the house smelled like stale coffee and furniture polish. My parents were in the living room, still in their nightclothes, a half-empty bottle of wine on the table between them. The folder that had held the deed was open again, papers spread out like playing cards. My mother's voice was low but sharp. "He can't just disappear like this," she said. My father rubbed his temples, eyes red from sleeplessness. "He's 83, Elaine. Maybe he wandered off." I stopped in the doorway. "He wouldn't wander off," I said quietly. They both turned, startled. "He called me 29 times. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" My mother looked at me like I'd said something inconvenient. "He was confused," she insisted. "He forgets things. He's been slipping." My father didn't meet my eyes. "Let it go, Nora. He'll turn up." The air in the room felt heavy, like the walls were holding their breath. I noticed the faint flicker of uncertainty behind my father's calm and something colder in my mother's stare, a fear she didn't want to name. I reached for the deed folder, but she slid it away before I could touch it. "That's private," she said. All day the house stayed quiet except for the sound of rain sliding down the windows. The staff spoke in hushed tones, their footsteps soft, uncertain. I wandered through the rooms, the ones that used to feel alive. Grandpa's study, the piano room, the greenhouse that still smelled faintly of soil and lavender. Everywhere I went, it felt like someone had pressed pause on a life that used to move. By evening, I found myself in the library again. Grandpa's chair still faced the cold fireplace, a thin layer of dust beginning to settle on the armrest. I sat down and pulled out my phone. The message he'd sent, "Take care of my house the way I took care of you," glowed on the screen. I read it again, whispering the words under my breath. I didn't know if it was a warning or a farewell. The storm outside grew louder. Somewhere upstairs I heard my parents arguing muffled words, a drawer slamming, then silence. A few minutes later, my father came down carrying a box filled with documents. "Where are you going?" I asked. "Office," he muttered. "There are things I need to secure." He didn't look at me as he left. My mother appeared in the doorway a moment later, her voice softer now. "You shouldn't worry so much," she said. "Your grandfather will call when he's ready. He always does." But her hands were trembling as she poured another drink. When she looked up, I saw something in her face, guilt, maybe, or regret, but it disappeared just as quickly. The next morning the storm had passed, but the sky was still gray. My father was already pacing the foyer when I woke. He had the phone pressed to his ear, his voice rising with each call. "No one's heard from him," he said. "The driver didn't pick him up. The airport has no record of his ticket. What the hell is going on?" My mother sat on the staircase, her robe pulled tight, staring at the floor. "Maybe he wanted it this way," she murmured. "Maybe he planned it." The words hit like a spark. I remembered his tone in the car, the calm way he'd said, "Sometimes you let people think they're in control until they're not." It hadn't been resignation. It had been certainty. Later that afternoon, I drove into town under the excuse of getting groceries, but my real destination was the airport. The woman at the counter checked her computer, then frowned. "I'm sorry," she said. "There's no reservation under that name. None for the last 2 days. I showed her his photo just to be sure." She shook her head. "I remember him, though. He was here early yesterday morning, sat by the window for a long time. Then a black car picked him up. Private driver, I think." A chill ran through me. "Did he seem upset?" I asked. "No," she said slowly. "Calm, like he knew exactly what he was doing." By the time I returned to the mansion, the driveway was filled with silence again. My parents were in the study, whispering fast. I caught bits of their conversation as I approached the door. "He must have had someone helping him," my mother said. "That lawyer, maybe." "What's his name?" "Avery," my father replied. "Thomas Avery. He's the one who handled the foundation paperwork." My mother's voice trembled. "Do you think Walter—" "Don't," he interrupted. "Don't say it out loud." I stood there for a moment before walking away. I didn't know what they had done or how far it had gone, but the fear in their voices was the first honest thing I'd heard from them in days. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the hallway made me sit up. Around 2 a.m, the security lights outside flickered. I pulled back the curtain just in time to see a sleek black SUV pull through the gates and stop by the fountain. The headlights cut across the wet stone gleaming off the bronze statue in the center. A man in a dark suit stepped out carrying a leather briefcase. My father appeared a few minutes later, pulling on his robe, his expression tight. "Who is that?" I whispered as he opened the door. "Probably nothing," he said, but his tone said otherwise. The man introduced himself as Thomas Avery, legal counsel for the Pierce Family Foundation. His voice was calm, professional, the kind of tone that leaves no room for argument. "I'm here to deliver an official notice," he said, handing my mother a sealed envelope. Her fingers shook as she tore it open. My father read over her shoulder, his face draining of color. "What is this?" he demanded. The man straightened his tie. "Confirmation of property reallocation," he said. "Mr. Pierce filed a corrective deed the same day you processed the transfer. All holdings have been reassigned to the Pierce Foundation." My mother blinked. "Reassigned?" "But he signed the deed over to us. He signed a deed," Avery replied. "Just not the one you think." He handed over a photocopy. The top of the page read, "Declaration of Charitable Trust, Pierce Estate." Grandpa's signature was there, clear and deliberate. The silence that followed was so sharp it hurt. My father's voice cracked first. "You're saying we don't own anything?" Avery nodded. "That's correct. The property, the accounts, and the trust are now assets of the foundation." My mother's eyes darted toward the windows as if she could see it all slipping away in real time. "That can't be legal," she said weakly. Avery's expression didn't change. "It's fully notarized and witnessed. You're free to consult your attorney, but I believe you'll find most firms are already aware of Mr. Pierce's actions." My father clenched his jaw. "Then we'll fight it." Avery adjusted his briefcase. "You can try," he said. But Mr. Pierce left a clause preventing reversal. He also asked that this letter be delivered to his granddaughter personally. He handed me a small envelope sealed with red wax. I broke it open and unfolded the note inside. The handwriting was his steady, precise. "My dearest Nora, some lessons can't be taught with kindness. Your parents wanted my house, so I gave them walls, empty ones. But I left you something else. Truth. When they realize what they've lost, come find me. I'll be waiting where honesty still matters." I looked up, but the man was already stepping back toward the car. "Where is he now?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "You'll find him soon enough." Then he was gone, the SUV gliding down the drive until its lights disappeared behind the trees. Inside the living room was chaos. My father paced, muttering under his breath. My mother sat on the floor, staring at the documents like they were in another language. "He can't do this," she whispered. "He can't." My father slammed his fist against the table. He already did. I stood there, the letter still in my hand, the ink smudging slightly where my thumb pressed. I didn't know what Grandpa's plan was, or where it would lead. But one thing was certain, the storm he warned me about had finally arrived. And this time, it wasn't outside. It was in our house. The house didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a theater, after the lights go out, empty, echoing, waiting for someone to admit the show was over. My parents moved through the halls like ghosts, arguing in sharp whispers, clutching at papers that had already lost their meaning. The letter from Grandpa stayed in my nightstand drawer, folded and refolded so many times the edges had begun to soften. "When they realize what they've lost, come find me." I read that line until I could almost hear his voice saying it. By mid-morning, I found my mother pacing in the sunroom, her robe still tied from the night before. She was on the phone, her voice brittle. "He can't just do this, Tom," she said, pressing a hand to her forehead. "We signed everything legally. You said it was airtight." Her words cracked. "Then find a way to undo it." She didn't notice me standing by the door until she hung up. "Thomas Avery?" I asked. She turned startled. "No." She lied too quickly. "An old friend." My father came in moments later, sleeves rolled up, eyes bloodshot. "Every lawyer in the city's avoiding us," he said. One even hung up the moment he heard our name. He kicked the leg of a chair and it splintered slightly, the sound slicing through the quiet. "He's made sure no one will touch this." My mother sank into the couch, her voice thin. "Then what do we do?" He didn't answer. I left them there, their silence heavier than their words. Outside, the sky had cleared, but the air still smelled like rain. I walked the length of the garden past the stone fountain Grandpa restored himself years ago. The koi pond shimmered under the pale light, and for a moment I could picture him sitting on the bench, a newspaper folded in his lap, saying something simple but true. I remembered what he used to tell me, how kindness builds empires longer than greed ever will. Those words had sounded like a lesson once. Now they felt like a prophecy. That afternoon my father called for Cal, the head of security. "You worked for him," he said. "You must know where he is." Cal's face stayed unreadable. "I'm sorry, sir," he said. "Mr. Pierce's travel records are private, even for family." My father's jaw tightened. "He's my father-in-law." Cal nodded once. "And he's my employer." The way he said it left no room for argument. When he left, my father muttered under his breath, "Everyone's turning on us." As evening settled, the mansion grew colder. I made tea in the kitchen the old-fashioned way Grandpa liked, loose leaves steeped slowly. My mother appeared in the doorway, her eyes swollen. "He humiliated us," she whispered, "after everything we did for him." I set down the teapot. "What exactly did you do, Mom?" She looked away. "We just wanted what was fair." I didn't press her, but the silence that followed said more than she ever could. Later that night, I sat by the library window with the letter again. The paper smelled faintly of cedar, like the inside of Grandpa's study. He hadn't vanished. He had planned every step. And whatever he meant by truth, I was starting to believe it had something to do with the foundation. The next morning, a knock echoed through the foyer. My father answered, his voice sharp. A courier stood there with an envelope marked Pierce Foundation. Legal Affairs. My father snatched it and tore it open. His face drained of color as he read. He moved everything he said hoarsely. "The trust, the endowments, even the offshore accounts. It's all under the foundation now." My mother grabbed the letter from his hands. "That can't be right," she said, scanning the lines. But it was. Every asset they thought they controlled was gone. I stood at the base of the stairs, watching, as realization settled over them. The walls that had once made them feel powerful now looked too tall, too wide, too empty. My father threw the papers onto the floor. "He tricked us," he said, pacing. "He waited until we thought we'd won." My mother's voice broke. "Why would he do this to us?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Unknown number, one message, Grant Tower, 52nd floor. "I'm waiting." My breath caught. There was no signature, but I didn't need one. I turned to my parents. "I know where he is." My mother stood. "You're not going anywhere." But I was already reaching for my coat. The drive into the city was quiet. The skyline rose through a thin haze, and somewhere between the highway exits, I realized I hadn't been this close to Grandpa's world since college. The building stood like a monument of glass and steel, the Pierce name engraved in silver above the revolving doors. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of pine and marble polish. The receptionist smiled when I approached. "Miss Bennett," she said. "He's expecting you." The elevator ride to the top felt endless. When the doors opened, the view hit first a wide stretch of city spread beneath a wall of windows. And there he was, standing by the glass, leaning on his cane. He turned when he heard the elevator chime. "I was wondering when you'd come," he said. His voice was steady, familiar, untouched by bitterness. I stepped forward. "You knew they'd do it?" I said quietly. "You let them." He nodded once. "Your parents forgot something important," he said. "You can't steal from someone who's already given up ownership." I frowned, confused. "You mean the deed?" He gestured toward his desk, where two folders lay side by side. The one they made me sign transferred everything to the foundation. I simply let them believe it was theirs. He walked me through the papers, trust reallocations, notarized statements, new board filings. Every line was dated, verified, airtight. They thought they'd taken my home, he said. But all they did was expose themselves. I looked at him, trying to understand. Then why let them think they'd won? He smiled faintly. Because people reveal who they are when they believe the battle's over. His words hung in the air for a moment before he added, I didn't do this to destroy them, Nora. I did it to free you. I felt my voice catch. Free me from what? From becoming like them. He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. You have a good heart. Don't trade it for greed. For the first time since that awful night, I could breathe. The pieces fit together now, every call, every silence, every lesson he'd ever taught. He hadn't been defeated. He had been deliberate. Every move, every signature had been a step toward this moment. As we stood there, the city stretching out beneath us, he looked almost peaceful. They'll come to see me soon, he said. And when they do, I need you here. I nodded. What should I do? Just listen, he said softly. Sometimes truth doesn't need defending, it just needs to be heard. He handed me one of the folders. Inside was a single document marked Founding Directive. At the bottom, beneath his signature, was another line left blank. You'll know when to sign it, he said, when you're ready to carry the work forward. The elevator doors closed behind me as I left his office, but the sound of his voice stayed with me, quiet and sure. Outside, the air smelled like rain again. The storm had passed, but something larger was coming, a reckoning that couldn't be stopped now. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. By the time I returned to the mansion, the clouds had rolled in again. The sky hung low over the valley, heavy and gray, as if waiting for something to break. I parked at the bottom of the long drive where the iron gates gleamed wet with rain. Inside the house, the lights were on, but the windows were dark silhouettes. From the doorway, I could hear my parents arguing somewhere deeper in the house, their voices bouncing off the marble floors. My mother was in the foyer when I stepped in. Her hair was pinned but messy, her lipstick faintly smudged. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "With him," I said. The words stopped her. She looked at me for a long moment before whispering. "So it's true. He really did it." My father came in from the study, his face flushed. "What did he tell you?" he asked. "That you can't undo what's been done," I said quietly. His eyes flashed with anger. "He's manipulating you." "No," I said, my voice steady. "He's protecting himself." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You have no idea what that man's capable of. He's made us look like fools." I shook my head. "You didn't need his help for that." The silence that followed was sharp. My mother turned away, rubbing her temples. "Enough," she said. "We need to fix this before the press finds out." They didn't realize it yet, but there was nothing left to fix. Grandpa had already moved every piece off the board. That evening, as thunder rolled in from the hills, I sat alone in the library again, the same place where this all began. My parents' voices rose and fell down the hallway, muffled by closed doors. Somewhere in the distance, a door slammed, then another. I ran my fingers along the spine of a book Grandpa once read to me. An old collection of essays, he said, taught him patience. His words from earlier echoed in my mind. People reveal themselves when they believe the battle's over. I was still thinking about that when my phone vibrated. A single message lit the screen. The gates. 10 minutes. I didn't need to ask who it was. The drive to the front of the estate felt longer than usual, the path slick with rain. 2 security guards stood by the main gate, their flashlights cutting through the mist. A black sedan waited beyond the entrance, its headlights dimmed. When the door opened, Grandpa stepped out slowly, leaning on his cane. He wore his old tweed coat, the same one he'd worn to every family dinner, every winter walk. My parents' car pulled up behind me, gravel crunching under the tires. They got out without umbrellas, their expressions tight with defiance and fear. For a moment, none of us spoke. Grandpa stood in the center of the drive, the rain catching on his shoulders like dust. When he finally spoke, his voice carried easily over the sound of the storm. "I was wondering how long it would take before you came." My mother tried to smile. "Dad, please, this has gone too far." He raised a hand, quiet but firm. "Don't," he said. "You explained everything the moment you drove away from the airport." My father's tone hardened. "You tricked us. You made us believe I made you nothing." Grandpa interrupted. His words were calm, but they hit like a gavel. For a long moment, the only sound was rain. My mother's voice broke first. "We just wanted security. You never made it easy to know where we stood. You kept us waiting, always testing us." Grandpa looked at her for a long moment before answering. "And when you finally stopped waiting, you traded love for greed." She started to cry, but he didn't look away. "We thought you'd forgive us," she whispered. "I did," he said quietly. "That's why I didn't call the police." My father froze. Police Grandpa nodded. "Fraud, coercion, forgery. Those are crimes, Richard." He glanced toward the guards. "But I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for truth." He turned to me. "Nora, the documents." I reached into my coat and handed him the folder he'd given me at the tower. He opened it, his hands steady despite the cold. When he spoke, his tone was measured, almost formal. "By the authority of the Pierce Family Foundation, all assets formerly held in my name shall remain property of the foundation, and any individuals found guilty of exploitation or coercion shall be permanently removed from the inheritance registry." My mother's breath caught. "Removed," she whispered. Grandpa nodded once. "You will live your lives, but not on my name, not on my work, and not on the back of my trust." My father stepped forward, his voice sharp with disbelief. "You can't do this." Grandpa met his glare. "I already did." The guard stepped forward and handed my father a sealed envelope. He opened it with trembling hands. Inside were keys and a set of papers. "It's a lease," Grandpa explained. "A modest apartment in the city, paid for 1 year. You won't be homeless, just humbled." My mother covered her face with her hands. "Dad, please," she sobbed. "We made a mistake." He looked at her for a long time, the rain running down his coat collar. His voice softened, but the weight of it stayed firm. "You didn't make a mistake, Elaine. You made a choice." Then he turned to me. "Nora, come home." I hesitated. "Here," he smiled faintly. "Someone has to fill this house with decency again." I followed him toward the car, the gravel slick under my shoes. Behind us, my parents stood at the gate, 2 silhouettes beneath the iron arch that no longer belonged to them. My mother reached for my father's arm, but he stood still, his face blank, the rain darkening his shirt. Grandpa opened the car door for me and paused, glancing back once before stepping inside. "They wanted a kingdom," he said quietly, "but they forgot who built it." As the car pulled away, I watched through the fogged window as the mansion lights glowed behind the rain. My parents didn't move. They stood there, framed by everything they had once claimed and no longer owned. The drive back up the hill was silent, except for the engine's low hum. Grandpa rested his cane across his knees, his eyes on the road ahead. When we reached the top, he said, "Tomorrow the story will spread. Let them talk. What matters is that the truth stands taller than the lies." I nodded, but the words felt heavier than I could hold just then. When we reached the front steps, he turned to me. "From now on, this house belongs to the foundation and to you. Keep it open for what's good. Close it to everything else." The rain eased to a drizzle. The porch lights flickered against the damp air, and for the first time in days, the house didn't feel cold. Somewhere deep inside, I could almost hear the faint scratch of a pen, the turning of a page, as if the story he'd started was still being written. He paused at the door, looking back toward the gates one last time. "They'll have to find their own way now," he said quietly. "Maybe that's what they needed all along." I didn't answer. I just followed him inside the warmth of the foyer, spreading around us as the doors closed. Down the hill, the rain swallowed the road, and the last trace of headlights disappeared into the dark. By morning, the story had already spread farther than the rain from the night before. Every local paper and news site carried the same photo: my parents standing outside the gates of the Pierce estate, drenched and stunned, their world reduced to a headline. Inside, the mansion was quieter than it had been in weeks. The staff moved carefully, their voices low, the weight of what had happened settling into the walls. Grandpa didn't speak much that day. He sat in his study behind the same oak desk that had once belonged to my father, now cleared of everything but truth. He called me in that afternoon. The door was half open, and sunlight filtered through the curtains, catching the gold edges of framed photographs that lined the shelves. "Come in, Nora," he said, not looking up from his papers. I stepped closer, noticing how steady his handwriting was on the pages in front of him. "It's time," he said simply, "for what I asked." He handed me a small badge and a folded note. "The press will be here soon. They deserve clarity, and your parents deserve honesty publicly." I hesitated. "You want me to speak?" He nodded once. "You stood by when they called, and you came when they didn't. That's all people need to know." His tone carried no bitterness, just quiet resolve. By the time the first cameras arrived, the courtyard was already filling with reporters. A podium had been set up on the marble steps, the foundation's insignia engraved on the front. Grandpa stepped out in a simple gray suit, no jewelry, no entourage, only his cane and a few pages in hand. The murmurs quieted as he began to speak. "Families should protect legacy, not plunder it," he said. "I gave my children everything, not because they earned it, but because I believed in them." I watched from the doorway, the wind carrying his words through the courtyard. "When I was left at that airport, I didn't feel anger," he continued. "I felt disappointment because betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it wears your last name." A hush settled over the crowd. Cameras clicked and flashes lit the overcast sky. But Grandpa didn't flinch. He turned slightly toward me and motioned for me to join him. My legs felt unsteady. As I climbed the steps, the sound of my shoes echoing against the stone. When I reached his side, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "This is my granddaughter, Nora Bennett," he said. "The only person who answered when I called not for money, but because she cared." My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. He continued, his voice steady. "She will help me lead the foundation moving forward, because integrity must live through those who choose it." Reporters murmured again, their questions tumbling over each other, but Grandpa raised his hand, silencing them. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. When he opened it, there was no jewelry, only a single brass key. "Every empire needs a heart," he said quietly, turning to me. "And yours beats where theirs stopped." He pressed the key into my palm. "To the foundation," he added, "and to my trust." The crowd erupted with flashes and shouts, but in that moment, everything felt still. Down by the gates, my parents stood in the rain again, surrounded by reporters but looking smaller than I'd ever seen them. My mother's makeup had run her expression hollow. My father tried to speak, but his words disappeared into the noise. Grandpa didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He turned back to the podium. "Let this be a reminder," he said. "Wealth means nothing if you lose your soul keeping it." The applause that followed was long and unbroken. Reporters shouted questions, flashes lit the air, and still he didn't waver. He thanked them briefly and stepped back, his grip on my shoulder steady as he guided me inside. Once the doors closed, the sound from outside faded to a low hum. He leaned his cane against the wall and exhaled deeply, his shoulders relaxing for the first time that day. "It's done," he said. "The truth belongs to the world now." I handed him the key. "You should keep it," I said. He shook his head. "No, Nora. You will. This was never about ownership. It's about stewardship." We walked back to his study together, neither of us speaking for a while. When he sat down again, he reached for one of the older photographs on the desk, a picture of him and my grandmother standing in front of the same fountain outside. "Your grandmother used to say a house doesn't belong to whoever pays for it. It belongs to whoever loves it most," he said quietly. Now you understand what she meant. The next morning, the story ran everywhere, morning news, online, headlines, talk shows. Philanthropist reclaims estate after family betrayal. Some called it a lesson in legacy. Others called it poetic justice. But inside the house, there was no celebration. Grandpa refused interviews, refused to comment beyond his statement. "The facts are enough," he told me. "Truth doesn't need decoration." That night we sat by the fireplace, the same one where I'd once listened to him read when I was little. The flames cast a warm light across his face, and for a while he looked younger, like the weight of the past had finally lifted. "You did well today," he said. "You carried yourself with grace." I smiled faintly. I was terrified. He nodded. So was I. Silence stretched between us, the kind that only feels comfortable when it's earned. "They'll have to face themselves now," he said finally. "No amount of money hides what the heart already knows." Later, as I walked upstairs, I paused at the landing and looked back down at him. He was still sitting by the fire, his cane resting against the arm of the chair, the light flickering against the brass tip. For the first time, I understood that this wasn't just about reclaiming a house. It was about restoring what decency looked like when the world had forgotten. The wind outside picked up, rattling the windows, but the house felt steady again, like it was breathing differently. Somewhere beyond the gate, I imagined the press still lingering, waiting for another comment, another soundbite. But there was nothing left to say. Before heading to bed, I set the brass key on my nightstand. It gleamed softly in the lamplight, catching the reflection of the rain still running down the window pane. I didn't know yet what it meant to lead, or how to fill the space Grandpa had built, but I knew one thing for sure: the foundation of everything he'd taught me was finally strong enough to stand on its own. Downstairs, the grandfather clock struck midnight, each chime rolling through the quiet halls like a slow heartbeat. Grandpa's voice echoed faintly in my mind. Every empire needs a heart. I glanced at the key one last time and closed my eyes, knowing the hardest part was over, but the next chapter was only beginning. By the time the reporters left, the estate grounds were soaked from both rain and flashbulbs. The gravel drive glistened in the morning light, streaked with mud from a dozen camera vans that had come and gone. Inside, everything was still too still. My parents had vanished from the headlines, retreating somewhere quiet where the story couldn't reach them. The foundation's phones rang nonstop, and the staff worked through boxes of paperwork Grandpa had set aside months before, as if he'd known this day was coming all along. The following week, he moved through the house with a calm I hadn't seen in years. No more meetings, no more late-night phone calls, just quiet purpose. He spent hours in the garden, pruning roses that had nearly drowned in the storm. They always come back stronger, he said when I joined him. You just have to give them new roots. It was in those slow days that I began to see how he'd rebuilt everything from within. The foundation wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Letters of support arrived from schools, hospitals, and shelters across the state. Donors who had once backed away came back quietly, leaving notes instead of excuses. The house, once filled with tension, felt alive again. One evening, I found him in the library, surrounded by stacks of old documents. "What are you working on?" I asked. He smiled without looking up. "Undoing the mess your parents made in the archives. They kept changing things they didn't understand." I sat across from him, the fire crackling softly between us. "Do you think they'll ever come around?" He set his pen down and folded his hands. "Guilt has its own pace, Nora. You can't rush someone to remorse." The next morning, I saw my parents' names in the paper again, tucked inside a small article near the back. Former heirs vacate family estate. It mentioned that the foundation had provided them with temporary housing in the city. There was no statement from them, only a short line that said they declined to comment. I folded the page and left it on Grandpa's desk. He didn't say a word when he read it, only closed the newspaper and set it aside. Days later, I drove into the city to deliver documents to the foundation's legal office. On the way back, I stopped outside the building listed in the article, a modest apartment complex, tucked between an old bakery and a laundromat. For a while, I just sat there watching through the windshield. Curtains drawn, no movement. When I finally gathered the courage to knock, my mother opened the door. She looked smaller somehow, her posture bent like someone learning to breathe again. "Nora," she said, her voice thin but soft. My father was in the background, fixing a broken lamp on the counter. The room smelled faintly of coffee and detergent. It was the first time I'd seen them without polish, without performance. "How is he?" my mother asked. "He's fine," I said. "He doesn't hate you, he just expected more." She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. So did we. There was nothing else to add. I left an envelope on the counter, an invitation to the next foundation gala, and said goodbye. When I stepped outside, the wind carried the faint hum of the city, distant but steady. Back at the mansion, Grandpa was waiting on the balcony, looking out toward the hills. "You saw them," he said quietly when I joined him. I nodded. "They're trying." He didn't respond right away, just kept his gaze on the horizon. "Trying counts," he said after a moment, "but it doesn't erase what came before." The following week, the foundation prepared for the gala. The event had always been my mother's domain. Grand gestures, string quartets, glittering chandeliers. But this year, everything was simpler. Smaller guest list, warmer lighting, soft music drifting through the courtyard. I oversaw every detail the way Grandpa taught me, steady, precise, with care for the people who would walk through those doors. The night of the gala arrived crisp and clear. The fountain glowed under lanterns, and guests lingered by the rose garden, their laughter gentle, not showy. Grandpa wore his favorite navy suit and a patterned tie that used to belong to my grandmother. When he took his seat near the front, I caught a glimpse of pride in his eyes that said more than words could. As the evening unfolded, speeches came and went, donations were pledged, and the band played something soft and familiar. Then just before dessert, I saw two familiar figures standing at the back of the hall. My parents. My mother wore a simple dress, her hair pulled back. My father looked older, his shoulders less sure. They didn't speak, didn't wave, just stood quietly, hands intertwined. I turned to Grandpa. He had noticed too. He leaned over and whispered, "Let them in." I hesitated. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "Every story needs an ending, even theirs." When the music paused, I walked to the back and met them halfway. The crowd parted slightly as I guided them forward. Grandpa stood as they approached. My mother's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment no one spoke. She reached out, her voice trembling. "We're sorry," she said. My father's jaw tightened, his hand still holding hers. We lost sight of what mattered. Grandpa's expression softened. "You lost yourselves," he said quietly. "Now you have the chance to find something better." He didn't embrace them, but he didn't turn away either. It was forgiveness without words, the kind that doesn't erase the past, but makes peace with it. Later, when the music began again, I caught sight of them standing at the edge of the crowd, not mingling, just listening. For the first time, they looked like people who understood what they'd almost destroyed. After the guests had gone, Grandpa and I stood by the fountain under the soft glow of lanterns. The air smelled like roses and rain. "You handled it well," he said. "Tonight wasn't about winning or losing. It was about remembering who we are." I glanced toward the empty ballroom, the echoes of music still lingering in the air. "Do you think they'll be all right?" I asked. "Eventually," he said. "The hardest part isn't losing everything. It's learning what you still have left." He leaned on his cane, the light catching the silver band around its handle. "Legacy isn't money or property," he said. "It's the choices people remember when the doors close." His gaze met mine. "That's what you're building now." The fountain's water shimmered, reflecting the soft light of the stars. The mansion behind us glowed warm and steady, no longer haunted, no longer hollow. And as the night deepened, I felt the first quiet sense of peace that had been missing for so long, like the story that began with loss was finally finding its way back to home. When we turned to go inside, Grandpa paused at the door and looked over his shoulder one last time. "They'll come around, Nora," he said. "It just takes time to grow back from the things you break." I nodded, following him into the soft light of the hallway, ready for whatever came next. The mansion felt different after the gala. For the first time in years, its walls carried warmth instead of whispers. The fountain outside glimmered under the early morning sun, the same place where my grandfather had stood so many nights before, looking out over everything he had built. Only now, it finally felt alive again. The air inside smelled of coffee and polished wood, the sound of quiet footsteps replacing the endless tension that once filled the halls. In the weeks that followed, life found a gentle rhythm. The foundation grew stronger under Grandpa's guidance, and he began easing me into the work he once carried alone. We met with schools and hospitals, reviewed grants, and spent long afternoons on the porch discussing what legacy really meant. "It's not what you leave behind in your will," he told me one afternoon, pouring tea. "It's what you leave behind in people." Those words stayed with me longer than anything else he'd ever said. I saw my parents again a few weeks later. They arrived unannounced, standing at the edge of the courtyard where the roses bloomed. They looked tired, but sober. No more excuses, no more performance. My mother carried a small envelope. My father kept his eyes low. Grandpa met them halfway, his cane tapping lightly against the stones. She handed him the envelope with trembling hands. "It's a letter," she said. Not for you to forgive us, but for you to know we understand now." He took it, sliding it into his coat pocket without opening it. "Understanding is a start," he said softly. My father nodded. "We've found work," he added. "Smaller place, simple life. It's quieter that way." Grandpa gave a single nod, neither praise nor pity. "That's good," he said. "Use the quiet. It's where you hear the truth." When they turned to leave, my mother paused and looked back at me. "You look like him when you stand there," she said with a small smile. "Maybe that's a good thing." After they left, I found Grandpa sitting by the fountain again. The envelope rested beside him unopened. "Will you read it?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Maybe one day, but I already know what it says." He tapped his chest gently. "They lost their way, but the heart finds its map eventually." As the months passed, the mansion settled into a peaceful kind of order. The laughter of the staff returned, and every morning sunlight spilled across the hall like forgiveness itself. I started leading foundation meetings, though Grandpa never sat far from my side. Sometimes he'd correct me with a raised eyebrow, but mostly he just listened. The first project I led was a housing program for veterans, something he had dreamed of years ago but never had time to finish. When the plans were finally approved, he smiled in that quiet, proud way of his. "Every empire starts small," he said. "The trick is to build it with purpose." One evening near the end of summer, we sat together on the balcony watching the hills fade into the dusk. The air smelled of lilacs and rain. He looked tired, but content. "You've done well," he said. "You brought life back to this house." I shook my head. "You did that." He smiled. "No, Nora, I just cleared the way." That night he handed me a sealed folder with my name written on the front. "What's this?" I asked. "The future," he said, "for when I'm no longer here to keep you from second-guessing yourself." His tone was light, but something in it made me pause. "Don't talk like that," I said quietly. He reached over and squeezed my hand. "It's not goodbye, my dear. It's a handoff." When I woke the next morning, the house was still. The sun was just breaking over the ridge, casting gold light through the windows. His teacup was on the porch table half full, and his cane rested beside his chair. He had passed peacefully in his sleep, facing the same view he'd loved his whole life. The days that followed moved slowly, wrapped in soft grief and quiet gratitude. The memorial was simple, just as he wanted. No grand speeches, no cameras, only those who truly knew him. We buried him beside my grandmother beneath the oak tree he planted the year they married. The breeze carried the scent of fresh soil and wildflowers, and for a moment it felt like even the earth was at peace. After the service, I returned to the mansion alone. His folder still sat on my desk untouched. When I finally opened it, I found a short letter and a copy of the Foundation's charter, now in my name. The letter was written in his familiar, careful handwriting. "Keep your heart clean, Nora. When the storm hits, you'll need it. Remember, the measure of wealth isn't what you own. It's who you become after loss." I read those words over and over, the ink blurring slightly under my tears. Then I looked around the study, the framed photographs, the worn armchair, the faint smell of cedar, and I felt it. His presence not as a shadow, but as strength. The house didn't feel empty. It felt alive, carrying every lesson he'd ever taught me. Years have passed since that day, and the foundation continues to grow. The Veterans Housing Project now bears his name, and every time I walk through those doors, I see a bit of him in the kindness of strangers helping one another. My parents visit, sometimes quietly volunteering at events, no longer running from their shame, but learning to make peace with it. And me, I've learned that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the choice to move forward without carrying someone else's burden. Grandpa used to say the world tests your character not by how much you can hold, but by what you refuse to let break you. I think I finally understand. So if you've ever felt betrayed or left behind, take heart. The storm doesn't destroy what's real, it just shows you what's worth rebuilding. If this story spoke to you, take a moment to share it or leave a thought below. And remember, kindness builds longer than greed ever will.